So, this happened to me a couple of years ago, and even though I've tried to brush it off as just one of those weird, unsettling experiences, I still think about it from time to time. It's the kind of thing that makes your skin crawl when you're alone at night, or when you find yourself in a place that's just a little too quiet. It all started when I decided to go on a solo hike in this forest, not too far from where I live. I'm the kind of person who enjoys nature and likes to get away from the city whenever I can. I usually hike with friends, but on this particular day, everyone was busy, and I just felt like I needed some time to myself. It was a Saturday morning, and the weather was perfect. Clear skies, a slight breeze, not too hot. So I packed a small backpack with some water, snacks, and my phone, and drove out to this trail that I'd been to a few times before. It wasn't super popular, which I liked because it meant I could enjoy the peace and quiet without running into too many people. The drive there was uneventful, and I reached the trailhead by around 10 a.m. There were a few cars parked in the small dirt lot, but it wasn't crowded at all. I got out, stretched a bit, and started walking. The first part of the trail was familiar. Tall trees, the sound of birds chirping, and the occasional rustling in the bushes as small animals scurried away. I was in a good mood, just soaking in the calmness and the fresh air. After about an hour, I reached a fork in the trail. To the right was the path I usually took, a nice loop that brought you back to the starting point after a few miles. But to the left was a path I hadn't tried before. I'd seen it on the map, and I knew it went deeper into the forest, eventually leading to a small clearing with a stream. I figured, why not? I had plenty of time and I was feeling adventurous. So I took the left path. At first everything was fine. The trail was narrower and a bit more rugged, but that just added to the sense of adventure. The trees were denser here, and the light that filtered through the leaves created this almost dreamlike atmosphere. I walked for what felt like another hour, maybe a bit more. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. The sound of birds became less frequent, and there was this almost eerie stillness that started to settle in. But I told myself it was just my imagination. I mean, it's a forest, right? It's supposed to be quiet. Eventually, I reached the clearing. It was a small, open area surrounded by trees, with a narrow stream running through it. The water was clear, and I could see the pebbles at the bottom. It was really beautiful, almost picture perfect. I sat down on a large rock near the stream, pulled out my snacks, and just relaxed for a while. I must have stayed there for about 30 minutes, maybe longer. I didn't see or hear anyone the entire time. After I finished my snacks, I decided it was time to head back. I got up, stretched a bit, and started walking back the way I came. But as soon as I re-entered the tree line, I felt this strange sensation, like I was being watched. Now I know it sounds cliche, but I swear that's exactly what it felt like. My skin prickled, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder more than once. But there was no one there. The forest was as still as it had been earlier. I picked up the pace, wanting to shake off the uneasy feeling. I told myself it was just the isolation getting to me. After all, I was alone in the middle of a forest. Of course, I'd feel a bit jumpy, but the feeling didn't go away. In fact, it got worse. I started hearing these faint sounds like something or someone was moving in the underbrush, just out of sight. I stopped a couple of times, listening, trying to convince myself it was just animals, maybe a deer or a rabbit, but the sounds were too deliberate, too rhythmic, like footsteps. At this point, I wasn't just uneasy, I was genuinely scared. I tried to keep calm, thinking that if I just kept walking, I'd be back on the main trail soon enough. But then I noticed something that made my heart drop. The path in front of me didn't look familiar. I stopped, looking around, trying to figure out if I'd somehow missed a turn. The trees all looked the same, and there were no obvious landmarks. I hadn't seen any other paths branching off, but the trail I was on didn't seem right. It was narrower than I remembered, and the underbrush was thicker, like it hadn't been walked on in a while. Panic started to set in. I pulled out my phone to check the GPS, but of course there was no signal. I wasn't surprised. I knew the signal could be spotty out here, but it was still a gut punch to see no bars at all. I tried to calm myself down, thinking I just needed to retrace my steps, but the more I looked around, the more disoriented I became. Everything looked the same, and no matter which direction I turned, I couldn't tell where I'd come from. Then I heard it again, those footsteps, but this time they were closer. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, listening. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, and they were coming from somewhere to my left. I strained my ears, trying to pinpoint the source, but the sound seemed to be all around me, like it was echoing through the trees. I couldn't see anyone, but the footsteps kept coming, slow and steady, like whoever or whatever was out there knew exactly where I was. I didn't wait to find out. I turned and started walking quickly in the direction I thought would take me back to the main trail. I didn't care if it was the right way or not. I just needed to move, to get away from those footsteps. But the faster I walked, the faster the footsteps seemed to follow. They weren't running, but they were matching my pace, staying just out of sight. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what was happening. Was someone following me? Why? I hadn't seen anyone all day. Maybe it was just my imagination, or maybe it was an animal, but the footsteps sounded too human. I started to panic, my breathing getting shallow, and I knew I was on the verge of freaking out. And then I saw it, a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. I didn't get a good look, just a flash of something moving between the trees. It was enough to send me into full-blown panic mode. I broke into a run, not caring about the trail anymore. I just wanted to get out, to put as much distance between me and whatever was out there as possible. The footsteps picked up speed too, keeping pace with me, and I could hear the underbrush rustling as something moved through it. I was running blind, crashing through the forest, not caring about the noise I was making. I was so focused on getting away that I didn't notice the ground sloping downwards until it was too late. My foot caught on a root, and I went down hard, tumbling down a small hill and crashing into the underbrush. I lay there for a moment, dazed and winded, trying to get my bearings. My ankle throbbed where I'd twisted it, but I didn't have time to think about the pain. The footsteps had stopped, but I knew whoever or whatever had been following me was still out there. I forced myself to get up, wincing as I put weight on my injured ankle. I had no idea where I was or how far I'd run. The forest was dense here, the trees packed closely together, and the underbrush was thick. I could barely see more than a few feet in any direction. I tried to listen for any sounds, but all I could hear was my own ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart. I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to keep moving to find my way back to the trail. I hobbled through the underbrush, trying to be as quiet as possible. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made me jump, but the footsteps had stopped. Maybe I'd lost whoever was following me, or maybe they were just waiting, biding their time. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled upon a small stream. It wasn't the same one I'd seen earlier, but it was something, a landmark I could follow. I figured if I followed it downstream, it might lead me to a larger body of water, or even back to the trail. I started walking along the bank, trying to keep my pace steady despite the pain in my ankle. The sound of the running water was comforting, a small reminder that I wasn't completely lost. But then I heard it again. The footsteps. They were back, and they were coming from behind me. I froze, my heart in my throat, and turned around slowly. This time I saw it clearly. A figure standing just at the edge of the trees, barely visible in the dim light. They were too far away for me to make out any details, but I could tell they were watching me, standing completely still. I didn't wait to see what they would do next. I turned and started running again, ignoring the pain in my ankle, ignoring everything except the need to get away. The footsteps followed, faster this time, as if whoever it was had decided to stop playing games. I could hear them getting closer, the sound of their feet pounding on the ground, matching the rhythm of my own panicked breaths. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to blur together in a haze of fear and exhaustion. The forest seemed endless, the trees all blending together in a disorienting maze. But eventually I saw something that made my heart leap with relief. A break in the trees up ahead. I was almost out, almost back to safety. I burst through the tree line and found myself on a dirt road. It wasn't the trail I'd come in on, but it was a road, a sign that I was back in the real world. I slowed down, gasping for breath, and looked around. There was no one in sight, no sign of the figure that had been following me. I collapsed onto the side of the road, my legs trembling, my body drained of energy. I don't know how long I sat there, trying to catch my breath and calm my racing heart. Eventually a car came by and I flagged it down. The driver, an older man, looked concerned when he saw me and asked if I was okay. I must have looked like a mess, covered in dirt, sweating, my ankles swollen and bruised. I told him I'd gotten lost and hurt my ankle, and he offered to drive me back to the main parking lot. As we drove, I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see that figure again, watching from the trees. But there was nothing, just the empty forest and the fading light of the afternoon. When we reached the parking lot, I thanked the man and got into my car, my hands still shaking as I fumbled with the keys. I drove home in a daze, trying to make sense of what had happened. I never saw the figure again, and I don't know who or what they were. Maybe it was just some creepy guy messing with me, or maybe my mind was playing tricks on me after spending so much time alone in the woods. But even now, whenever I think about that day, I can still hear those footsteps, slow and deliberate, following me through the trees. I haven't gone back to that trail since. I still enjoy hiking, but I stick to more popular trails now, ones with plenty of other people around. And I always make sure to go with a friend, because no matter how much I try to rationalize what happened that day, I can't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone out there, and whoever was out there with me, they didn't want me to leave. Alright, so this is a story I haven't really told many people, because it still freaks me out when I think about it. It happened a few years ago, and even though I try to brush it off as just one of those creepy encounters that you hear about, it's stuck with me, like this weird, uneasy feeling that I can't quite shake off. It was a Friday evening, and I had just finished a long day at work. I remember it was one of those days where everything just dragged on, and by the time I finally got out, I was starving. I didn't feel like cooking, and since I was trying to eat a bit healthier at the time, I decided to hit up a Subway near my place instead of the usual fast food joints. This Subway was in a pretty quiet part of town, kind of tucked away in this small strip mall. It was never really busy, especially not in the evenings, which was one of the reasons I liked going there. You could just grab your sandwich and go without having to wait in a long line or deal with the crowd. I figured I'd go in, get my usual turkey and veggie sub, and head home to relax with some Netflix or whatever. When I pulled into the parking lot, it was pretty much deserted, except for a couple of cars. The lights inside Subway were on, but it looked like there wasn't anyone else there besides the guy behind the counter. I parked, got out of the car, and walked in, already looking forward to that first bite. As I walked in, the first thing that struck me was how quiet it was. Like, even quieter than usual. There was no music playing, which was odd because they always had some generic pop playlist going on. The guy behind the counter didn't say anything when I walked in. He just kind of looked up at me, then went back to whatever he was doing, like cleaning the counter or something. I thought it was a little weird, but whatever. Maybe he was just having a bad day. I walked up to the counter and started ordering my sandwich. The guy, who looked like he was in his late 20s or early 30s, tall, kind of lanky, with this messy dark hair, started making it without saying much. He wasn't unfriendly, just distant. I tried to make small talk, just to break the awkwardness, but he didn't really respond, just nodded a bit or gave short answers. As he was making my sandwich, I noticed there was this strange smell in the air. It wasn't the usual smell of fresh bread or veggies. It was something else, something off. It wasn't super strong, but it was there, this faint metallic scent that just didn't belong. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe it was something from outside or that I was just imagining things. Anyway, he finished making my sandwich, wrapped it up, and handed it over to me without much of a word. I paid, grabbed my food, and turned to leave. But as I was about to push the door open, I heard him say something. It was so quiet, I almost didn't catch it, but it made me stop in my tracks. He said, "Be careful out there." I turned back to look at him, confused. His expression was completely blank, like he wasn't really looking at me but through me. It was unsettling, to say the least. I just nodded awkwardly and left, figuring he was just being weird or trying to be nice in his own awkward way. I got back to my car, and that's when I realized I wasn't as hungry as I thought. That strange smell from inside had kind of killed my appetite, and I couldn't stop thinking about the way the guy had looked at me. But I shook it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid. I decided to eat in my car instead of driving home right away. So I unwrapped the sandwich and took a bite. It tasted fine, just like any other Subway sandwich, but I still couldn't shake that uneasy feeling. I kept glancing back at the entrance, half expecting to see that guy standing there, watching me, but he never came out. After a few more bites, I couldn't take it anymore. I wrapped the sandwich back up, tossed it on the passenger seat, and decided to head home. As I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced back one last time at the subway, and that's when I saw it. Something that made my stomach drop. There was a figure standing at the back door of the subway, just barely visible in the dim light from the nearby street lamp. It looked like the same guy who'd made my sandwich, but there was something off about him. He was standing there, perfectly still, just staring at my car as I drove away. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could feel his eyes on me, cold and unblinking. I drove off, trying to calm myself down, telling myself it was just my imagination, that the guy was probably just stepping out for a smoke or something. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. When I got home, I parked my car in the driveway and sat there for a few minutes, trying to collect myself. I kept looking around, half expecting to see that guy standing somewhere nearby, but there was nothing. Just the quiet neighborhood, the faint hum of distant traffic, and the occasional bark of a dog. I grabbed the sandwich, got out of the car, and headed inside. As soon as I walked into my apartment, I locked the door behind me and double-checked it, something I didn't usually do. The place felt unusually quiet, and for some reason that made me even more uneasy. I tossed the sandwich in the fridge, figuring I'd eat it later if I got hungry again, and tried to distract myself by turning on the TV. But even as I sat there, flipping through channels, I couldn't get the image of that guy out of my head, the way he just stood there, watching me leave. After a while, I decided to go to bed, hoping that some sleep would help me shake off the weirdness of the night. But when I lay down, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head, over and over, until I finally drifted off into a restless sleep. I don't know how long I slept, but I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. It was that kind of sudden wake-up where you don't know what woke you, but you're instantly alert, your heart pounding in your chest. The room was dark, but I could see the faint glow of my phone on the nightstand. At first I thought maybe it was just a bad dream or something, but then I heard it. A soft, almost inaudible sound coming from the kitchen. It was the sound of something moving, like the rustle of plastic or the quiet creak of a cabinet door. I froze, listening, trying to convince myself it was just the apartment settling, or maybe the wind outside. But then I heard it again, this time a bit louder, a deliberate sound, like someone was trying to be quiet but not quite managing it. My heart was racing now, and every instinct in my body was telling me something was wrong. I reached over for my phone and checked the time. It was 3:47 a.m. I didn't want to move, didn't want to get up and check, but I knew I couldn't just lie there. I grabbed the small flashlight I kept in the drawer next to my bed, took a deep breath, and slowly got out of bed. I crept toward the door, trying to be as quiet as possible, and listened again. The noise had stopped, and all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing, shaky and uneven. I opened the bedroom door just a crack, enough to see out into the hallway. It was dark, but I could see the faint outline of the kitchen at the end of the hall. Everything looked normal. No lights on, no movement, just the usual shadows. But then, as I stood there, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The fridge door was slightly open, just a few inches, and I could see the dim light spilling out into the kitchen. I knew for a fact I'd closed it when I put the sandwich away. My mind was racing, trying to come up with an explanation, but nothing made sense. I stood there, frozen, not knowing what to do. Part of me wanted to just shut the door and call the police, but another part of me thought maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe I hadn't closed the fridge door all the way, and it had popped open on its own. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. I forced myself to move, stepping out into the hallway and inching my way toward the kitchen. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, and I gripped the flashlight so tight my knuckles were white. When I reached the kitchen, I hesitated, then quickly pushed the fridge door shut with the back of my hand, not wanting to look inside. I stood there for a moment, listening, but everything was silent. I slowly backed out of the kitchen, my eyes darting around the room, looking for any sign of movement, but there was nothing, just the same dark apartment I'd lived in for years. I went back to my bedroom, locked the door, and sat on the bed, trying to calm down. I checked the locks on the windows, making sure everything was secure, and then sat there in the dark, listening for any more sounds. But there was nothing. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, It was morning, and the sun was streaming through the windows. The first thing I did was check the kitchen again. Everything was where it should be. The fridge was closed, the cabinets were shut, and there was no sign that anything had been disturbed. But as I opened the fridge to grab the sandwich I'd left in there, I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. The sandwich was gone. The wrapper was there, crumpled up and shoved to the back of the shelf, but the sandwich itself was missing. I stood there, staring at the empty wrapper, trying to make sense of it. There was no way I could have eaten it and forgotten about it, and there was no one else in the apartment. I lived alone, and the door had been locked all night. I never found out what happened that night, and I never went back to that subway. For weeks after, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in my apartment, that I wasn't alone in those dark hours of the night. I even thought about moving, but eventually, the fear started to fade, and I convinced myself it was just some bizarre coincidence. But every now and then, when I'm home alone at night, I'll hear a noise, just a little creak or a rustle, and it all comes rushing back. The guy at Subway, the open fridge, the missing sandwich, and I can't help but wonder if someone somewhere is still watching me, waiting for the right moment to remind me that I'm never really alone.